and something to take notes, because something is gonna, again, is gonna resonate and probably be applicable to your current resume. So I'll give you guys a second to grab that. And then Perry, I'm gonna need screen sharing capabilities if I don't have them already.
1 second. And you got it.
And there's a portion that I'll reference here where I'm gonna go to one of my Drive folders, and I just shared that with you, Perry, too, and I kind of customize it to the senior class, so you can copy that folder and distribute any of those resources to anyone after I go through them today.
Okay, so I can copy it to the class. So I'm the one who has access.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you're the only one who has access, but I'd prefer just actually make a copy of the folder as opposed to just bring them into that folder, because there'll be other edits made later that won't be applicable.
Got it.
All right, so everyone have something to take notes with and their current resume. All right, thumbs up if everyone has the full screen presentation up. Good. Also, anytime during this, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. This can go back and forth. I don't need to just hear myself talk for the next 20 minutes or so. And if there's any confusion, or if there's different ways of interpreting some of these guidelines that I have, just chime in. So what I plan on going through today is I want to review the learning goals of Aspire. I know you're all seniors. The Aspire program started last year, so you didn't have the first 2 years of being able to take advantage of some of the things that we're doing. I do want to acknowledge, I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but everything that the Aspire has to offer, you have access to for life as an alumni. So whether or not this is something that's going to come into play a year from now after graduation, if you're going to do a career switch, if you want to polish up a resume a couple years from now, switching from one place to another, finding other mentors or people in your network, you still have access to us again for life. So I want to make sure you guys understand even just where resumes fit is just a small portion of the services and the goals that we have in the Aspire program. Then we're going to go through the purpose of a resume, really understand what the philosophy and the lens through which to make decisions about a resume, which I think is important, the hard do's and don'ts, tips and considerations, which is the majority of the decisions you have to make. I'll give you guys a couple examples. That's going to be in that folder that I shared with Professor Kowalowicz that has an example of a student who has CS, and these are examples from students from Carthage. One is a CS major with a math minor, and the other one is a CS minor. So you can see some examples. Then I'll link you to some resources and make sure that you're aware of the career fair and the Aspire conference, which are both coming up in the next 2 weeks. All right. So there's a lot in these next 2 slides, and that's intentional because I want you to see that down here on the second slide, resume building is just one small portion. And I don't want to read this whole paragraph to you, but I want to give you guys an opportunity to kind of read through. There are 4 Aspire learning goals. And it's much broader than the traditional career services tactics and strategies. It's not just about prepping for an interview or getting a resume or looking for a job, but it's about how does your career fit into your interest, skills, and values, a holistic life, building your network, being able to tell your story. So I'll give you guys about 2 minutes to read through these first 2 learning goals, and then I'll switch to the next slide, and then we'll narrow it down to just the resume. And again, as you're reading through, if there's a topic in here that you think is something that you want to enhance or expand on that you haven't experienced, make a note, and that's something we can still hook you up with either me or someone else in Aspire to get these things moving. Or if it's something that you think is your strength, but you want to know how to articulate that, the same thing applies. And Professor, too, if you see anything in here that you think would be a topic for me to come back to and discuss, then let me know as well.
I will.
All right. Goals 3 and 4. All right, so as you can see, we kind of worked backwards from what the workforce is telling us is what used to be considered a lot of times maybe gives you a competitive edge, or it's a luxury to have some of these experiences and qualities. But now, as we're seeing just how rapidly and unpredictably the workforce is changing and evolving, that a lot of these other pieces that you even heard some of the recruiters talk about having the grit, being adaptable, being creative, being a problem solver, having leadership skills, being able to communicate to multiple parties, those are all, they're no longer just things you need to have an edge, but they're going to increasingly be absolutely necessary. So to me, the Aspire program is more about those pieces, about how do you actually tap into the best version of yourself, and not just for the career, but even how the career fits into the rest of the aspects of your life. So as this comes up again, whether or not you, for this school year prior to graduation or even after graduation, for any of these topics, let me know. So then just resume building is what we're getting tapped into today. So someone unmute and give me an answer as succinctly as possible. And this is an oversimplification, but I'll tell you why it's necessary. But what is the purpose of a resume? Someone take a shot.
To display what you've done.
Oh, good. Anything else?
To promote yourself quick for employers.
Okay. Let's get one more.
Show like what's in your toolbox, I guess.
Good. So all that is what is in the resume, right? But the actual function and the purpose of the resume, it helps for me to always remind myself to this every time I'm making decisions and what to put in or what to take out. The purpose of a resume as a tool, as a job, is just to get you an interview. That's the whole function of it. And if we remind ourselves of that when we make decisions about what to put in that resume, then it makes it clearer when we ask questions, again, if this is necessary or not, because it's not the place to tell your story. It's not the place to put in everything about you. It's not the place to try to convince or articulate how things are going to apply. It's literally just to try and get someone to talk to you. So the things that you would discuss in the interview or in a cover letter aren't the things that you put in the resume. It's so whether or not you decide to, the format and the flow goes from the top down. If you replace something, it's all about, will this help me get a job interview, or will it hurt me to get a job interview? And if we bring that back to that simple lens, we're gonna talk about a couple hard do's and don'ts, but ultimately, if you ask yourself that question as you're making those resume decisions, will this help or hurt me to get that interview? Then sometimes it helps. So let's not overcomplicate things. Let's bring it back to let the resume do the job it's supposed to do, which is to get you an interview. So with that, the reason why it almost reminds me of some pieces of cooking. Sometimes the easiest dishes are the simplest dishes are the easiest ones to get wrong. Just cooking rice perfectly, because it's such a simple dish, there's so many things that could possibly go wrong. And a resume is one of those things too, where because there's only really 3 absolute rules, the rest are all subjective decisions. And the only 3 rules we have are, it's got to be easy to read, has to flow and be consistent. So any person that gives you advice about resumes is going to agree on that, right? There's no reason you wouldn't want it to flow and be consistent or be hard to read. No one's going to advise that you have errors or typos. And this this PowerPoint's going to be in those resources too that Professor Kapalis can share with you. And it's got to be honest. It's got to be truthful. So that's really it. Everything else is a subjective decision that, you know, everyone has an opinion on whether or not, you know, how flashy for it to be, the format of it. And those are all things that we'll talk about considerations. But those three right there, as you're looking at your resume, just even ask yourself, at least minimally it has to hit those 3 check marks. Is it easy to read? Does it flow? As soon as you see it, do you understand where your eyes are supposed to go? Right? Does anyone, as we're moving forward, ask a question, does anyone know about how long the average current recruiter spends looking at a resume? It's another one. Take a couple guesses.
Isn't it just like a couple seconds?
Maybe.
Yeah, I
What
heard
else?
3 seconds.
Yeah, as of right now, the most, and I think this is just as of 2020, just because of it was about a year and a half ago, it was about 10 seconds when they measured it, and this last year it was about 6 seconds. So if you think about the whole purpose of this document is to get you an interview, and they have to decide whether or not they even want to consider put you in the consider pile, you have 6 seconds. So that's why the easy to read, the format, and not overdoing it is so important. We read left to right, top down. So that's the most valuable piece of your resume. So anything that's the most impressive, you want to make sure that it's, you know, top of the page, left, and just understand that everything you put in there, if you have a word or you have some fluff that doesn't get you to say anything unique about why they should talk to you, then you just wasted maybe a second, or you wasted 2 seconds out of that 6. So if you think from the top down, 6 seconds, I have to catch their attention, right? So now those are the only hard rules. These are some considerations. So again, look over your resume as we go through these, see if any of these apply. If you don't know, if one of these does apply and you don't know exactly what to do about it, then again, we can set up a time to go over it later. But one of them is we don't advise to use some of these private templates because sometimes they don't interface well between the employer if you send it over. I mean, yes, you can lock it into a PDF, but then it's hard to make any edits unless you go back into that template. So we advise to just keep it simple, what everyone has, keep it in Word, Pages, or Docs, easy to manipulate, and everyone's system is going to be able to upload it well. I haven't had a reason for any college student to have anything longer than a page. I'm sure there could be a reason. There's just extensive amounts of professional experience, projects, micro internships and internships, and then maybe grad school things in there, but I wouldn't see any reason why any one of you wouldn't be able to fit all your information on one page. So double check that. And what I kind of typically give as guidance is think of your resume as kind of a living document that you have to constantly kind of go in and update depending on where you're applying. If you're applying for places that have the exact same type of role, maybe you're not changing that much, but each place that you apply to, there's going to be keywords in the description of that job, in that organization, that you could work backwards and make sure that you sprinkle in to your resume. So to that point, about 80%, 75 or 80% of your resume would probably stay static, but you could tweak about 10 to 15% per job to make sure that you're working backwards from the job description so that they can see that you align and that you'd be a good fit. Any questions about any of that?
So kind of a brief question. So for me personally, I have to make a law school resume. So how would the tips and considerations, would that still be the same? Would they change?
They so far, well, obviously the three hard rules stay the same. And so far, most of these tips and considerations, the only thing that would be different is your resume may look different by using the job description as your guide, by working backwards from what is it that you're applying for.
Okay, that
some
makes sense.
and some of the pieces, like for a CS one, you're going to really want to highlight your technical skills, and that might be high on the page, but that wouldn't necessarily be what you would put in that format for law, right? You might highlight, you might have, might use more of your space talking about impact that you've had, either with working within the community or working with multiple organizations. You might want the eye to focus more on those parts that align with the work that you're going to be doing. But the rest of the pieces of, you know, the kind of the length and easy to read and format, all those are consistent. The only one that sometimes, and that it goes off the rails a little bit for me, is if you are something like, you know, for graphics design, then your resume itself is actually an example of your design style. So that's one of the only scenarios where I'd say, yeah, go ahead and throw a picture on there, have colors, have it be really unique and catching to the eye. But unless you're applying for something artistic based, I would say keep it with, you know, knowing that they're going to read it in 6 seconds, and just keep it classic, easy to read, easy to follow, and get to the information quickly. So to that being said, I mean, the go-to fonts where you, sometimes even as something as simple, if you use a unique font, I mean, someone could potentially use a couple seconds just trying to figure out what font you used. And it's just unnecessary use of that time. So go to the ones that everyone's eyes already are used to and already know, and they're clean and easy to look at. 10 to 14 points, all that could be adjusted. So the font size and the spacing between your lines is all really just to be adjusted so that it fills the page well. That's the whole point of the font size, is if you really want to make sure that the print to the white space of your resume is balanced well. So that's why you just adjust your font and your space sizes. We still get, you know, kind of immature style clip art resumes every once in a while, where someone may have made it in high school and it has a very, you know, educational look to it with borders and clip art on it. Just avoid those now. Again, it can take time for someone trying to figure out why you decided to do that, and you wasted time for them to look at the content. And then being professional, but drawing the eye as far as being able to know where to look quickly if you want to get information. So it shouldn't just look like a piece of paper with just a, you know, 2 paragraphs on it of just condensed words. You have to know how to get to the places with your eye as quickly as possible. Any questions about any of that? Is some of this resonating with the resume that you're measuring it against, your own one? I mean, is it kind of following? Anyone see anything in theirs already that they have to make adjustments on? All right. So this is what's going to be in the folder that is shared with you. I want to show you a couple student examples. Actually, I'm going to show you 2 other resources first. So this is going to be in there that you have access to. I still use this now. If you start any one of your bullet points from your experience, you want to start with an actionable verb and make sure you're not redundant in using the same verb over and over and over again. So as you go through what your experiences have been, here's just a quick list that you can just let your eyes run over and see if there's a better way of describing something that you've accomplished, right? So just take a look at those lists. These are lists that if you don't use in your vocabulary that often, you forget to consider them, and it goes on to a whole nother page. So if you're going to write a dynamic resume and someone's going to scan it with artificial intelligence to make sure you're not being redundant and that the verbs that you're using are actually aligning with the description, right? This just gives you a quick list. And every time you make an adjustment on your resume, I would just look this over and see if there's not a better, more compelling way to articulate some of the work that you've done. So this is, to me, this is an extremely valuable tool that I didn't have until we came here. So there's that. This is, so again, that using in conjunction with that verb list. So the first part, you would usually typically start your sentence when you look at your experience or work that you've done, you start it with the action verb. And then if you, instead of just saying, let's say it was, even if you're talking about working at Starbucks, I, you know, cleaned floors every night, right? how can you drag that out and talk about what skill was embedded with it, and what was the result of it? If anything that you worked on, you have the chance to say what it was that you did, what was the responsibility, what skill did you have to use to accomplish that, and then what was the result of it? Especially if there's data, if you actually have data, if you increased the efficiency of something, if you increased the sales, if you decreased the time, right, and there's actual results in it, try to put those into your bullet points when you actually talk about your experience. It's going to be much more dynamic. So just use this as a chart, and then it gives an example. All right. So use that in conjunction again with the verb list as you're writing out those bullet points. To me, the bullet points is probably it's the only place in the resume where you're actually being able to really articulate something, right? A lot of the other information is just static information: where you went to school, what's your email address, right? The names of the places you work, the dates. But these bullet points is the only place for you to actually convince and tell your story about what you can and can't do. So if there's any place to spend the most time on your resume, it's in this section when you're talking about, each experience. All right, so now we'll see how a couple of those look. These are two senior Carthage students. I just took their names off and changed them. And I'll show you that this is, they don't use the same format, but it's easy to kind of pick apart where those sections are. Your eyes kind of know where to go. And both of these students landed competitive internships with these resumes, so we know that they worked. But you can just see how easy it is to just kind of get to where you want to get to. A couple other decisions that you could see were made on this one is neither of these two have a section on top that says summary or objective. So if each of you look at your resume, you can see if you have a summary or an objective. And here's what I propose to students about whether or not to have one or not. Again, because it's only 6 seconds or so that they're going to look at it. If they don't learn anything important about you in that objective statement, then you just wasted time and space. If it just says your objective is to land a competitive job as a software engineer, right, then they know that that's what you want because you're applying for the job. So you didn't tell them anything, and it doesn't make anything unique against someone else. The only time I would say to use it like a summary or an objective is if you really don't have the skill or the experience to justify why you're applying. So then you're basically trying to convince them to take a look at you. So you can look at your resume and make that decision if you want, after this, for me to look at it and help you decide whether or not you should have a summary or objective statement. I can help you figure that out. The other one is a lot of time leading with education. One thing that this student didn't do that is another option is sometimes I like to have students have a section up here under education that says relevant coursework, especially if you're a senior and all the CS classes that you've taken. If you just have a section that just says, not a whole section, but if you have a line that says relevant coursework and you just list the courses that you took in CS, again, if an AI system scans your resume, there might be some keywords that pop up just out of the titles of your courses. And they can look at your courses, and aside from your technical skills portion, it'll give them an idea of what your knowledge and skill base is just by the courses that you took. So this student didn't decide to do that, but I think it's if you have the room for it, to me, it helps more than it hurts. So again, going backwards from kind of the job description and what they're applying for, the technical skills is up here high. I think that's important. I think it's important for your guys's area, probably more than others, because this is what they're, as you even heard the recruiters talk, it's heavily in, okay, should we give them a second look because we know that what their skill set is, what systems and languages that they have the capabilities. So for all of you, I would have the technical skills part high up on your page. And then when you go down to your experience, again, now you have the opportunity to, where did you apply those technical skills is what you're asking yourself. And this is where you use that matrix that I share with you. So if you had an internship, if you had a project that's even, if you have a project in one of your classes that allowed you to apply these technical skills, all that is considered experience. and then use that matrix to have the bullet points to say, okay, what skill did you use? What technical skill to achieve what with what results? And if you could do that, then do it. And then if any other professional, any other jobs that you had or internships that you have, just reverse chronological order. The less that the experience applies to what you're applying to, the less bullet points. I mean, if you were a server in a restaurant, it's great because it also shows that you were in a professional setting, that you could have had a leadership role, a training role, but if it doesn't really apply to what you're applying to, then think of the more bullet points go to the experiences that apply to whatever it is that you're applying, the less the least. The other thing that's not on this one, because I don't think the student had it at the time, is they have the phone number, email address. Physical addresses right now it's no longer, I mean, it's you could do it, but it's no longer needed. And then I haven't learned of a company yet that has done anything with your physical address. And in fact, there could be some bias or discrimination about whether or not to hire you based on where you live if it's not close and they think you might have to travel. So to me, it's valuable space too, right? So anything that you have up top, if you don't need it, don't put it up there. So I personally like the decision to not have the physical address up there. But what you could have, and which I suggest all of you have, is if you have a link to your online portfolio, like a GitHub or something, put that right up on top too. Or if you have a LinkedIn, go into LinkedIn and change your address so that it's not, half the page long. And if any of you need to know how to do that, you can go in and change your URL in LinkedIn. So it's just clean. It's just your name in LinkedIn. So you could have your phone number, email address, LinkedIn account, and your online portfolio. Because you could write anything on the resume, but as soon as they see your online portfolio, now it's evidence of the work that you can do. Any questions about the way the layout of this resume here? So this will be in there as an example. Again, it's not the one. It's just an example of how someone interpreted those tips and considerations, and had the 3 hard rules in there. I'll show you another one. This is a student that has a CS minor. But the reason I put this one in here is this student had really good bullet points. So just take a look at how some of these bullet points are written and how they showed the skill sets and what the responsibility was and the outcomes. So if you need to know how to write some decent, bullet points, this would be a great example to go back to. So because this student was actually going to be an actuary, that's why you don't see the technical skills part up top, because that wasn't the most important. The exam was, and some of the experience was more important.
Would an AI notice the placement of the keywords, or would it just scan through the whole thing and check if it's there?
It's for just the keywords, it'll scan the whole thing, but it will also scan for sections separately. Right before this meeting, we're probably going to end up looking into whether or not we get our own resume AI at Carthage. So we're looking at a couple different providers, which again, you guys will have access to this year if we get it this year or as a graduate. But yeah, it analyzes so many different parts. It's not just one. So it'll do the keyword search across the whole thing, but then it will also point them to certain sections that will be highlighted. It's much. I mean, I was made aware of application scanning AI, which is scary actually, because most applications are basically thrown in the digital trash before they even see a human's eye. But then now with what they're doing with actual resumes, is, to me, it'd be irresponsible to not try to at least write these in a way that is going to be useful if you think that there's a possibility that's going to be scanned by AI. So that's why to me, it's so important that you kind of work backwards from the job description. Everywhere you apply, try to take out anything you can out of that job description that you think is going to be applied to you, and throw it wherever is most appropriate in there, because I'm sure that they have it coded in their scanning system if they use it to kind of pull out some of those keywords. So again, even just style-wise difference. I've seen some of these before where like these titles, like education could be centered and this whole line going all the way across. That looks good. So again, those are all just subjective choices, and anyone that looks at a resume and gives you feedback may have a different interpretation, as long as you have those 3 hard rules. But just keep it clean. Make sure your spacing is well, it's consistent. A lot of people like to blow these dates way out to the right, because if you don't, now you have all this dead white space and these dates get lost to the left. So that's why a lot of resumes you see, you have the dates are all off to the right, just to balance the space. So all just decisions to make, right? Yeah, so those are all the resources that will be in that folder that you can access anytime. We have a couple more, but I didn't want to inundate you with things that you may not use. But those are, the resume matrix and the verb list, using together to kind of look over your bullet points. And then if you want to see again, and I also just, every time I work with a student, I show them just if the value of just Google searching graduate CS resumes that landed competitive jobs, and just look over a couple, and you can spend 5-10 minutes, and all of a sudden something will trigger, like, oh, I guess I could say that, or I really like this, or I could see why this stood out to someone. Get any competitive edge you can. All right, I'm gonna go back to this. All right, so that's it for those pieces. Before I get into that, is there, as you guys are looking over your own resume, I know this is just kind of getting it started, and as you guys go through the next couple classes and you polish this up, I'd be happy if you send something my way. If you have a decision to make and you want someone else's input, I'd be happy to do so. Was there any questions about any of those choices on creating your resume? All right. Again, but if there is, and you just don't think of it right now, or as you're going to build it or fix it, you have one, again, reach out to me or access these resources. Very important.
Let me jump in before
Yep.
you get to the announcements. Let's not let these people off the hook so easily. There are how many students here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I want at least 6 different people to ask Tom questions. You can't tell me you have no questions about something as important as the rest of your life. So put up, people.
Well, my question's kind of simple. Where are these resources located? Just on the Aspire website?
Got you. So no, these ones, I just shared a folder with Professor Kovalowitz, and he's going to make a copy and then be able to share it with you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
So you said that in our LinkedIn, we should take off the space where it shows our physical addresses, correct?
Yeah, I'm gonna see. I haven't done it in a while, but I'm gonna see if I can. I'm gonna see if I can show that actually. And as soon as I get there, I'll share. Someone else can think of what they want to ask while I'm getting into this.
This is more a preference of what to include inside a resume, but recently I received like some advice from someone who works with like reviewing resumes, and they said that I should include hobbies, which I personally thought wouldn't be necessary. What's your take on listing your own hobbies?
So that's something that comes up through your research to me to make the decision. If you understand how importantly culture is an environment is a priority for a particular place. There are some places that we talk to where that's their number one priority, is they want to make sure that they're building a work team that understands the culture of that company. So in that sense, they're just trying to see, because that is as important too. You could have all the technical skills, but it's not going to fit if you don't fit their corporate culture, right? because they want to make sure that the team is going to work well together. So a lot of times they'll just want to know that, because that also comes out in the interview for everybody. But if they do it that early, that means they're probably prioritizing whether or not you're going to be a good fit for the team. So I would only choose to do that if, in researching that company, they keep kind of coming back to that piece of what type of work culture it is. I wouldn't just have it. I mean, I would have that information available that if any times I want to put it in, I'd put it in, but that wouldn't be a default piece that I'd have. But organizations and involvements, I think, would be appropriate. And you could take something that broad, because if you just put involvement, then you don't have to break it down to educational involvements. You don't have to break it down to academic versus sports. You don't have to break it down to whether it's off campus or on campus. You could just have involvement and then have your bullets underneath there. Let me see if I can. I'm gonna have to go back in and I'll send it again. Actually, I'll put it in that folder right after this. But basically what it is, and if anyone here knows where it is on here, well, you can go into LinkedIn, you can find your URL to get to your page, and you can edit your URL. And basically it's like making it a hyperlink, and you can edit your URL to just be more visually appealing. It's just your name or something and the LinkedIn. Otherwise, if you just take it as it is, it's just that big, long 30-character line, right? So it also just shows that, you know, a little bit more savvy, you understand taking that little detail. So I'll make sure I get the actual location on how to do that, and I'll send maybe a little article on how to change your URL.
I have a
All right,
question about like order of a resume. So is it more important to do experience like chronologically, or when should you choose like how to put those together?
That's a great question. Order of the sections themselves, to me, so whether or not like you start with education or you start with work experience, or if you have education then work experience then skills, to me, I tend to favor go order of most impressive, right? Just knowing that you're reading left to right and top down and you have so many seconds. So what makes you the most qualified and what's the most impressive is what I do. Then once you're in the section, like work experience, it's a choice to make. It's, let's say you had a job recently that doesn't relate to what you're applying to, and then right before that you had an internship that really did. So now you make a decision: do you just go reverse chronological, but the first thing they're going to read has nothing to do with what you're applying to, or do you flip-flop them and just have the one that's more recent, and then they'll have to decide on the side by looking at the dates whether or not which one was most chronological. In that sense, because it's time sensitive of what you get to, I personally would put the most relevant and the one that relates most to what you're applying to. But if they all kind of do, if your last 3 experiences all kind of relate and one of them isn't just coming out of left field, then I would just put them in reverse chronological. So that's one of those kind of choices where there's not one answer to it. It's kind of like what is your experience and what is the most applicable. But I tend to, when it's on the fence, I err on the side of the most impressive and the most applicable to what you're applying to, top down.
Okay, thank you.
All right, what else we got?
2 more.
He's got the tally mark.
You can go, Scott, if that's
Okay. I was just gonna ask, should you keep your resume to like 1 page only, or like is it okay to spill into like 2 pages? Like, is there a hard and fast rule, or is it kind of like?
Good. That brings up a concept I didn't talk about. Thank you. I think what you should have in your file, you should have a catch-all. You should have an everything resume. And that everything resume could be 3 pages. It's basically all the information that you could put in your final draft when you send it. And then when you send your final draft, it should be 1 page. But again, if you are applying to this one place, 2 different places, there might be a section you would take out or leave in based on that particular job. So you could have just an everything resume that's just kind of, you know, almost like your outline that you could just copy and paste and pull the most relevant pieces if you want. Because again, there might be, depending on where you're applying, you might want to highlight different things that's in your experience. So go ahead and have a version that you just have a running document. But for all of you, there's no reason to not have it one page, and not even have it one page dense. Again, just the time issue. If they're going through these piles of resumes and they pull yours and it's 1.5 pages and all the lines are used up, they might not even looking at it just because they're just like, ugh, and just throw it, right? So you want to be able to actually draw their eye to the most relevant pieces and just don't have as, you know, cut out as much fluff as possible. Good question.
You kind of talked about like when to use an objective and when not to. So like you probably want to be utilizing an objective maybe if you don't have like internship experience example for us. And then like in that objective, are you kind of trying to put like what you want like out of the experience, or what exactly?
Good. Yes, and between objective and summary, personally, I tend to like summaries better, because an objective is basically answering the question, what is it you're trying to do? The biggest thing you're trying to do is you're trying to get an interview for this job, right? So there's really not much more you can say about that. But a summary basically is almost like a mini cover letter. So you get to actually expand a little bit more. You give a summary of who you are, right? Which could include, you know, senior CS student Carthage with experience in, right? And all these other pieces that you can kind of put into a summary that wouldn't be appropriate to put into an objective. So if you're going to choose to do one, and there's something unique about you as a character, because I've had students that have had, you know, very unique experiences that would highlight a reason why a company would want to take a look at them, but that's not something that really pops out in their resume, right? Let's say if, you know, anyone that's trilingual or something, right? I mean, something that just really sets you apart, or you've worked in 3 different countries, or something that just, or you're a veteran, something that just you think is going to immediately set you apart from somewhere else, you could put in your summary place, especially if it's not something, again, that pops out. So yes, only something on the top if it outweighs the information right below it. And that's the question for me you can ask yourself to keep it or not keep it. Is the information in that summary or objective more impressive than the information that's right below it? If it's yes, then keep it. If it's no, then get rid of it. Good. All right, so again, you guys have access to these resources, but this is a living, fluid thing. So as you go through it, you're going to be making changes, constantly kind of making edits and upgrading. But at least now I think the purpose of today was not about solidifying the hardened rules, but was really understanding the philosophy and the lens through which to ask yourself questions, and the lens through which you make the decisions and answer those questions. So that should get you started. Yeah, so now just valuable, which I think is going to be applicable to everyone in here. Coming up next week, there is a career fair already, and it's for all the Kenosha colleges. It's on Handshake. If you go right through the link, it shows you all the employers that are there. And like Professor Cavallo says, you can't go anywhere without computer science being at the pivot and the hinge points. So these are all, it's going to be 100% virtual. You can get on, look at the companies, make sure your resume is uploaded, and have a virtual, you know, it's basically a virtual interview and listening session. So there's not going to be too many more opportunities this year to get 30 plus employers all in one spot at one time. So once you have access to this, and it's also in my email address, the link is at the bottom of my email address, but it's in Handshake. You could just search fairs and I'll bring you right to it. The 2020 Virtual Internship and Career Fair with Kenosha Colleges.
Thomas, do professors have access to Handshake?
I think it has to be, it's not by default, but by request, it can be. Because right now it's only as the career services or the student who have automatic accounts. So you can have an account, but you're not automatically assigned one.
Okay.
Do you want me to talk to someone to get that to you?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's coming up next week. So that's, what's the time? So yeah, actually right after this class. So next week, right after this course, a virtual career fair. So that's that one. And then our flagship, Aspire, our flagship event for every year is our conference. And it's another thing that's virtual this year. But we have it, the whole thing is virtual, and we have alumni, professionals from the industry. And we really tap on all those other pieces that I talked about in the learning goals. And for this year, the highlight is really navigating a changing world. So it's all the skills and stories and ways that you can start to wrap your mind around what is life going to be like after college, and how do I ensure that I have the skill set, the character traits, and the network to help me navigate something that is evolving unpredictably. So that's pretty much the theme of this year's conference. It's over 3 days, and you don't have to go to the whole thing. You can just chime into whichever pieces you want. Some of them are half hours, some of them are professional, some of them are just about networking. We have like a dinner for 4 where we have a couple of students, faculty member, and alumni have a virtual dinner together and discuss topics. So good in there, pick whichever piece that resonates with you. You could go as long or as short as you want. But again, that's our flagship event for the year. That's coming up between the 13th and 16th. So that's those links to there. And again, that's Carthage EDU Aspire /conference. But the links to each are in that PowerPoint as well. So that's that. You guys good to get started? Good. Any last questions? All right, well, that's all I have. And again, I offer to you, Professor Cavallo, and all of you too, any follow-up between now and whenever you need to pull the trigger on applying somewhere or talking and reaching out to an employer, then me and someone else in the Aspire Center has your back.
Okay. So in the next few classes, we're going to have resume criticism, resume critiques.
Nice.
And you're welcome to be part of that if you'd like.
Okay. I think too is a good, that not even knowing that was what was coming up next, those tips and considerations, I think is a good, it almost serves as its own checkbox, list of checkboxes of something you can, as you go, before you submit and as you look at each other's, and you look at your own, kind of go through that checklist of make sure it hits the dues, the absolute dues, and whether or not the decisions in those considerations were a decent decision to make.
Okay.
Well, thank you all.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Talk soon. And I'm gonna send everyone a link. Actually, I will just put it in the folder for how to change that URL in the LinkedIn.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye. Okay. Discussion.
I enjoyed that. I thought it helped a lot, actually.
Okay. Good.
Feels like I have a lot to do in a short amount of time, but well, I already have a resume, but I feel like I need to kind of rework it and got to start networking. Probably should have been doing that a while ago, but better start now than never.
All right. Let's see what I think we're doing. So today is resume discussion, and that is correct. Tuesday will be, on Monday, I want you handing in your resumes to me. And Tuesday will be K-Force, the headhunting agency, the recruiters. and resume critique for the rest of that time. And then all Thursday will be resume critique. So you will be screen sharing your resume, talk about it for a little bit, and then your classmates are going to offer their constructive criticism. And during that time, the pirate flag will be up. So everybody can be brutally honest, because without brutal honesty, you could be missing some advice that could alter your life course. Okay? So yeah, that brutal honesty part is necessary, because you don't want to be like, after going through a painful divorce and your best friend says, I never liked that person, and I just didn't feel I could tell you. Okay? All right. So if there's nothing else, then we'll call it a day for today. And what I want you to do with the remaining time, of course, I can't check on this, but why don't you spend the remaining time of this class period working on your full proposal, okay? All right, so this will be online as a recording and within a day or two. Okay, so if no one has questions for me directly, we can sign off, but I want you to do work on your proposal.
I have one quick question. So I
Go.
did use like a what's it called, application formatting for my resume. Should I redo that in like a Microsoft Word document, or can I just keep it as is?
Well, what is it that you're going to present to your law school?
Mm,
So give me
my
what you are going to present to the law school.
my skills, history, my software education, that kind of stuff. Leadership,
Okay,
organization, academic honors.
so give me a PDF file that is what you will give your law school.
Okay.
Okay, and for everybody, please make all documents in the future PDF files. I do all of the editing on an iPad, and the software only takes in PDF. Okay? Any other questions?
I've heard multiple times that I should avoid templates. So why do companies bother making these like resume templates at all?
Well, for one thing, it can sucker you into giving them your email address, right? Maybe you'll even get suckered into buying something. And in some fields, the templates make a difference, right? You know, and I'm not going to make any subjective judgment on what fields do what, but I can tell you that a fancy schmancy template in our field doesn't help. The most salient point is, you just heard, 6 seconds. You've got 6 seconds to draw them in. So, other questions? Remember, top down, left, right. So that top left corner quadrant of your page, that has to be the best stuff you've got. All right, please go work on your proposals, okay? And I will see you on Tuesday or sooner if you'd like. Okay. Bye, folks.